Welcome back to Breaking the Chains, Healing from Emotional and Physical Abuse. This is Season 5, Episode 2. Donations help my podcast grow larger and produce more smoothly. As I stated in the previous podcast, my merchandise is more costly than I would like. The reason being is because I am going through a third party. However, I only receive a small percentage from each merchandise that is sold. Also, you can purchase that merchandise by clicking on the link in the description below. And thank you all so much for your continued support. Again, I am your host, Kelly, and this is Season 5, Episode 2. And the topic of this episode is called, Why is it so difficult to leave an abusive relationship? There are many factors as to why men and women will not leave an abusive relationship. I truly believe that self-worth plays a big part in not leaving an abuser. When a victim of abuse continues to stay with his or her abuser, then their self-confidence is so low. Therefore, they truly believe that they aren't worthy of love and respect. The reason that a victim of abuse self-esteem is so low is because the longer the abuse continues, he or she will start believing the hurtful things the narcissist says, making you feel worthless. Narcissists love tearing down their victim's self-esteem because their victim drowns themselves in self-doubt. And this makes the narcissist feel superior to you. It's a sign of control from your narcissist. They love to be in control of your emotions and your life. The abuser will feed off from their victim's validation, meaning that your abuser will need constant praise from you so he or she won't feel so bad about themselves. Narcissists seek constant validation, attention, and praise to compensate for low self-esteem and perceived lack of confidence and acceptance. I'm going to restate that. Narcissists seek constant validation, attention, and praise to compensate for low self-esteem and perceived lack of confidence and acceptance. This is how narcissists feed off from their victims' emotional energy. Also, it's very important for a victim to realize that you will never receive validation from your narcissist, and it's a losing battle. I'm going to repeat that also. Also, it's very important for a victim to realize that you will never receive validation from your narcissist, and it's a losing battle. The reason is because a narcissist is unable to show you love, respect, approval, and support you need. I'm going to restate that. The reason is because a narcissist is unable to show you love, respect, approval, and support that you need. List of factors as to why people stay in abusive relationships. These are serious factors that weigh on a victim's mind as to why he or she stays in abusive relationships. Number 1, victims feel leaving can be very dangerous. Many victims living with an abuser. Hold on, let me restart that. Many victims living with an abusive partner fear that he or she will become more violent or even lethal if they attempt to leave. Their abuser most likely threatened to kill them, their kids, or pets if they leave. It is documented that victims of abusive partners are at high risk of injury when leaving. I'm going to repeat that. It is documented that victims of an abusive partner are at risk of injury when leaving. Also, the victim feared the safety of the people who are helping them to leave. The fear of the unknown for the victim of abuse. 2. What about my kids? Many parents of abuse fear that the court system will grant custody to the abuser. So your child or children are living with your abuser, which is a very harmful environment. I'm going to restate that. Many parents of abuse fear that the court system will grant custody of the abuser, so your child or children are living with your abuser, which is a very harmful environment. This is a consistent fear because if the abuser gains custody of their child or children, then he or she could get hurt, harmed, or killed. I'm going to restate that also. This is a consistent fear because if the abuser gains custody of their child or children, then he or she could get hurt, harmed, or killed. Also, the victim is concerned about financially providing for their children since they experience financial abuse during their abusive relationship. 3. Lack of resources. The victim of abusive partnership may not have their own source of income due to financial abuse. Let me repeat that. The victim of abusive partnership may not have their own source of income due to financial abuse. The victim may not have access to bank accounts due to their abuser closed all joint accounts. He or she may not have enough cash because all bank accounts were closed by his or her abuser. Also, the victim may not have alternative housing, meaning not a relative, friend, pastor, or church member housing for the victim. Therefore, the victim will not have shelter for themselves and their children. 4. Institutional responses. A victim will oftentimes have a pastor or clergy stating, "Save the abusive relationship and at all cost." Rather than reassuring hold on, let me restate that. 4. Institutional responses. A victim will oftentimes have a pastor or clergy stating, "Save the abusive relationship at all costs," rather than reassuring the victim that leaving their abuser will stop the abuse. Despite the issuing of a restraining order, there is little to prevent the abuser from returning to attack their victim. I'm going to repeat that also. Despite the issuing of a restraining order, There is little to prevent the abuser from returning to attack their victim. There is a limited amount of shelter beds, which means no shelter for you and your children. 5. Social barriers. Some victims have been instilled that divorcing your abusive partner is a sin and unforgivable. In reality, abuse is sin. Please remember that God hates abuse. In some cultures, leaving your partner is disgraceful, even when abuse is happening in your relationship. Also, having a disability will make it harder for a victim to leave their abuser. When having a disability, then you are depending on your abuser for physical support. A person with disability feels like his or her well-being is tied to their abuser. 6. Cycle of violence and hope for change. Most abusive partners exhibit a behavioral pattern that is described as a cycle of violence. The cycle of violence has 3 phases, and I'm going to state those 3 phases and go into detail with those 3 phases. So the cycle of violence has 3 phases. Number 1, the honeymoon phase. This happens at the beginning of the abusive partnership, when the relationship seems very loving. The abuser creates a safe place with a sense of love and security with their victim. It's very exciting and a carefree environment at the start of the abusive relationship. 2. Tension building. The abuser begins to assert his or her power and control over their victim. The abuser will set impossible rules for their victim to follow, and when he or she does not follow their rules, then there will be consequences. The abuser will be argumentative, angry, uses yelling, criticism, swearing, and angry gestures toward their victim. The abuser will also use threats. 3. Explosion or violent incidents. As the tension builds, violence is most likely during the explosion phase. The abuser will have a major act of violence during this phase. He or she will use physical harm, use verbal abuse, or both. The abuse is triggered by anything, everything, and nothing. The trigger is the excuse used to justify his or her violent behavior. The reason that a narcissist wants their victim to stay is because he or she wants total control of every area of your life. It makes no difference that a narcissist will continue to give you fake apologies for his or her constant physical, mental abuse, or both. It will not stop your narcissist from abusing you. Your narcissist will continue to act superior to you. Also, your narcissist will never stop manipulating you and anyone that believes his or her pathological lies about their victim. I'm going to restate that. Also, your narcissist will never stop manipulating you and anyone that believes his or her pathological lies about their victim. Please remember that your narcissist will not take accountability for the abuse, and he or she will blame the abuse on you. I'm going to repeat that also. Please remember that your narcissist will not take accountability for the abuse, and he or she will blame the abuse on you. For example, a narcissist tells the victim that I have physically... restart that. For example, a narcissist tells their victim that I physically abused you because you made me angry. It is never a victim's fault for being physically, emotionally abused, or both. All of the abuse that you endured, please remember leaving your abuser is a process. Survivors may leave their abuser several times and return before permanently separating from his or her abusers. I'm going to repeat that. Survivors may leave their abusers several times and return before permanently separating from his or her abuser. Research shows that it can take approximately 7 attempts before the survivor permanently leaves their abusive partner. I'm going to restate that also. Research shows that it can take approximately 7 attempts before the survivor permanently leaves their abusive partner. You are so courageous for taking the steps to leave your abuser. You are on your journey for healing from your abuser. Domestic violence is on the rise in the U.S. I truly believe that there are so many men and women that stay with his or her abuser is because they are filled with never-ending fear from their abuser. I'm going to repeat that also. I truly believe there are so many men and women that stay with his or her abuser is because they are filled with never-ending fear from their abuser. The victim has been threatened physically, emotionally, or both from their abuser. If you are in an abusive relationship, please leave before it's too late. It isn't worth losing your life. Also, it will not bring you peace of mind staying with your abuser. Thank you so much for listening. Again, donations help my podcast grow larger and produce more smoothly. Also, you can purchase my merchandise by clicking the link below. Again, I am your host, Kelly, and thank you all for your continued support. Have a great evening.